Welcome back to the PFF NFL show. Trevor, Sikkema, Dalton, Wasserman here with you guys for another off-season episode of the program. Here today, we're talking about bounce-back candidates for all 32 teams in the NFL. So we're going to take a look at the rosters, the players that were on there last year. Most of them are going to be players that were on there last year, but some guys, maybe they're new. You can say like, hey, they got to bounce back. They're free agent additions. We're bringing them in. We're thinking that they're going to have a better year. Whatever it is, whether it's the stars, the depth players, the role players, whatever, we're going to talk about guys that need a better 2025 than what we saw in 2024. This list, thankfully, is done by our own Dalton Wasserman, who is back here with us after the AC/DC concert. Dalton, how you feeling? First of all, how was the concert, and how you feeling afterwards?
Oh, fantastic. It was the greatest band of all time, Trevor. Of course, it was incredible. I got in a great setting at Soldier Field, got right down in front, down on the rail, paid a whole boatload of money to get down in the pit down there, but it was worth every penny, and I'll tell you what, I mean, they're still the greatest band of all time. I don't care if they're 70, 80, 90 years old. You can say what you want, but that's what plays best for me still is stuff like that, AC/DC, Metallica, Aerosmith, anything that I can still get to as long as they're still walking, I'm going to go to it. So it was certainly, they just proved once again why they're the GOATs, and Soldier Field was such a great setting for it.
Even if they're not walking, you know?
They can be sitting down. I don't care. That's fine, too. Do whatever you need to do. If you're still playing, you're still playing. I'm good.
You're going to be front row of the nursing home tour from AC/DC.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all the concerts I go to. That's actually what we call it, just a nursing home tour. That's it. Just eventually one of them's just going to pass out on stage, and maybe I'll be at the last one. But you know what? I'll do it. I'll still do it every time.
All right, two-part follow-up question. One, what's the newest band that you've ever seen in concert? Okay, so I want you to think about that. And then two, so I'm kind of like, I don't know, I'm kind of like a hardcore, post-hardcore, emo music, like whatever you want to call like that genre. I'm into bands where there's like moshing involved. Now, I'm not saying I'm not one that really like gets in the pit anymore. Certainly, like, you know, when I was like, I don't know, in high school, early college, maybe I'd dabble in it depending on how heavy the metal band was. But what, like at an AC/DC concert, is there like moshing? Is there like a circle pit going on? Are we doing anything, or are people just kind of like jumping around yelling the lyrics? I don't even know what goes on.
No, it's a little calmer than they don't mosh at those shows like they used to. Because, well, I mean, I was probably the youngest person up there in the pit anyway, so I mean, I would have won that battle. But they weren't trying to do that. But no, I mean, we talk about newer ones. I mean, there's certain generation. You talk about bands like Godsmack and Shinedown and stuff from the 2000s. It's fantastic. The Pretty Reckless open for AC/DC. They're fantastic. Absolutely love them. You know, I could name off a whole bunch of, hell, the Revivalists. If you've ever heard of the Revivalists from New Orleans, that's fantastic too. I mean, there's some newer ones. It's just, you know, there's less than there used to be back in the 80s. Even though I talk like I was born then, I wasn't born until '94. So, you know, do I know it firsthand? Not necessarily, but I get the idea. You know, it's just you just got to find them, Trev. But as far as any of the moshing goes, no, we got to find other shows for that if you want to do that.
I just wanted to get the juices flowing for you, so I wanted to bring up the concert to make sure that you were ready to go here for this.
I'm awake now for sure. Absolutely.
I know. It's gonna be a long one because we got any time that we're doing a topic where we're covering all 32 teams. There's gonna be a decent amount of discussion that we're gonna have throughout the NFL. So let's do it. Let's get it started. We're going to talk about the Arizona Cardinals first. So we're going to go in alphabetical order with these teams, starting for the location of the team, not necessarily the mascot of the team. So that's why we're starting with the Arizona Cardinals. You have edge rusher Baron Browning as the bounce back player. And correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that this is also an article over at PFF.com. So if people want to read along and see what you've said here, and maybe a little bit more detailed information that you might have on the website, they could do so with the article. Correct me if I'm wrong there. But if not, Baron Browning, you have him as your bounce-back candidate. Let's hear why.
Yeah, there's a handful of players on this list who maybe had a struggle. You know, they struggled through the first half of the season and then got better down the stretch and gave you some positive signs that this year is going to be a better year for him. And that was the case with Browning when he was in Denver the first half of the year before he got traded to Arizona. Really a struggle, dealt with some injuries, I believe, that he was trying to play through early in the season, and it just wasn't all there. The run defense, that grade dropped off dramatically, even though it was really good in the 70s, I believe, the year before. Last year, under 30, one of the worst worst in football, and just couldn't find it as a pass rusher in Denver either. He goes to Arizona, and in that time, he has the 16th best pass rush grade. He has the 6th best pass rush win rate. You saw, and now on a deeper defensive line with the Cardinals, maybe he doesn't necessarily have to play every snap. So if you're wondering why did the Cardinals give a 2-year extension to a guy last year who graded a 58 overall? We've seen better from him in run defense. They saw firsthand better from him as a pass rusher. Now when you look at the depth of that Arizona Cardinals defensive line, if you're talking about Baron Browning playing something like 35 to 40 snaps instead of 60 to 65, I think he's going to be really effective down there. Even if he still struggles in run defense, okay, keep him off the field on early downs, get him in on a lot of passing downs out there with Josh Sweat. I think they've done a great thing with this defensive line as a whole, and one of the big things was re-signing Baron Browning to that extension after what they saw from him after they traded for him last year.
I'm a Baron Browning guy. I'm a Baron Browning believer, and so I like this call out here because if he is even like in theory what we believe that he could be, even if it's 80-90% of whatever the potential that you think that this guy could play to as a pass rusher, I think it really makes one of the better front sevens in the NFL. And I think that Jonathan Gannon's going to have a lot of fun with this team. You mentioned with Josh Sweat coming along, and obviously to have Darius Robinson and those two veterans that we've got along the defensive line as well, Walter Nolan. Like it's going to be a really strong group in that front seven, especially if you could throw Baron Browning in the mix, and he could really work alongside those guys. I agree with you with Baron Browning. The only other player that I would really throw out there is I looked at the cornerback room, and Max Melton certainly I think could play better. Sean Murphy-Bunting, yes, but for this specific exercise, bounce back, is that really applicable to either of those guys? I'm not sure that that's the case. Will Johnson, I think, would be the other player who, he's a rookie. He's going into his first year in the NFL, but I'd like to even see him be a bounce back from what we saw early in his college career as a freshman and a sophomore, because he dealt with injury last season, but he was not the same player. It didn't feel like he was the same player as a junior, and we really need him to look more like that freshman, sophomore version of him, at least when he is getting his start in the NFL. So I would say that a bonus one, an extra one there is I would say Will Johnson, just because I want to see a little bit better from that secondary room and that cornerback room there in Arizona. Speaking of the cornerback room, as we go on to the Atlanta Falcons, you have cornerback D. Alford here as the bounce back candidate. Talk to me about D. Alford here.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a case where in 2023 we saw him play better. A coverage grade in the low 70s in 2023. Last year that drops to 55.9, and in the regular season he was targeted early and often. He was the 4th most targeted cornerback in the entire NFL in the regular season last year, and you could feel it. Teams were attacking him in the slot. They were finding ways to isolate him in single matchups, even though the Falcons play a ton of zone coverage, and he missed a career-high 12 tackles, which will play into the grading as well. So I think a little more consistency, a little more physicality. There are some positive signs. Had a career high with 9 pass breakups last year, so he definitely still competes to the football. He's just got to be a little more physical, and I think part of it, too, with this Atlanta pass defense as a whole, we've talked about so much about how they got no pressure on quarterbacks. Well, when those quarterbacks have all those clean pockets, the guys in the secondary are going to be the ones who suffer from a statistical standpoint. So I think Alford is that guy. If the Falcons can get a better pass rush going, and he can just bounce back and tackle a little bit better this year, I think he could be better in the slot for him. They have A.J. Terrell outside. They have Alford inside. They're working on finding out whoever the CB2 is. Could be Mike Hughes, could be Clark Phillips, anybody out there. But I think Alford should be in for a bounce back because we've just seen him play better than this before.
Yeah, I think that D. Alford's probably the correct pick here, right? I thought about A.J. Terrell, but Terrell was fine. He didn't have a career year near his best when he was a sophomore in the NFL, his second year, but I thought he was fine. So I think that Alford's probably a better candidate to choose here. Kyle Pitts is the name that I would love to list, but it's sort of like bounce back to what? Like who he was at Florida 4 years ago? I think that that's asking a little much at this point. His rookie season, I thought that he was fine, but it's just, he would be more of a breakout candidate than a bounce back candidate at this point in time, at this point in his career. So I think the most impactful answer is somebody who could really break out as a Kyle Pitts, but it doesn't exactly fit along the title of the show, if you will. So I wanted to shout his name out, but I do think that you were correct. I think D. Alford is the guy who you really want to have a bounce back season, and if he does, he'll be fantastic. Darnell Mooney was still good last year. Bijan Robinson was obviously a breakout. Tyler Algier was still great. And then on the defensive side of the ball, I think there's a lot of young guys that were there. Like Ruka Rororo is somebody who I thought about as well, who is like, okay, they really need him along that defensive line to play better. but bounce back. He hasn't exactly broken out yet in the NFL, with last year being his rookie season. So again, wanted to throw all those guys out there because I could see a need for them to play better, but I do think that D. Alfred is the correct choice here from you. You went with Roquan Smith for the Baltimore Ravens, and we always have linebacker debates with fans. I think that they think that linebackers sort of play a little bit better than they do just because they get a lot of tackles. They're around the ball a lot. But I think for Roquan Smith's standards, last year was a little bit of a step back in the impactful play, and even with the consistency with him. No Patrick Queen playing next to him last year, so I think that certainly went into it. But so you pick Roquan. I think this is a good choice for you because I think that he could play at an even higher level. What did you think of Roquan, and what do you expect from him this year?
I think you said it exactly right there. It was adjusting to life without Patrick Queen, because that year and a half that those two played together, you could argue they both played the best football of their careers, and they were so in tandem, and the chemistry was just so right in that defense with those two next to each other. And with Queen gone, it took Smith a while to get going. You look at the season that he had, finished 37th among linebackers in overall grade, among qualified linebackers, and then it was really a split between the first 10 weeks and then week 11 onward, especially in coverage. And I think Smith, we talked so much about Kyle Hamilton and Ardarius Washington in the secondary, but when they simplified their defense and their coverage schemes down the stretch, I think Roquan really benefited from that too. An 81.8 coverage grade from week 11 on. That was one of the best marks in football. I believe it was the fourth best among all linebackers in that stretch. So when you look at getting used to the different style of defense they were playing the second half of the year, getting used to life without Patrick Queen, and maybe having to make up for it a little bit more in the run game. And I think there could be a bounce back in run defense this year, because it wasn't quite what the performance he had put up the previous 2 years, I should say. I think Roquan, look, we know he's better than this. We know it's just a matter of finding the right guy to play on the weak side next to him, right? He's a classic middle linebacker. He can do a little bit of everything in a defense, but you can't just have that one guy. I think there's several teams in the league right now. They might have one, but they're trying to find somebody else to help out. So I think adjusting to life without Patrick Queen took him a while, got better in coverage as they simplified the schemes, and now he can put together a full season with all of those adjustments in place.
Yeah, I just think that the ceiling of who Roquan Smith is as a player sort of goes into that. And I thought about maybe having Mark Andrews here, but I thought that Mark Andrews was honestly fine outside of the playoff game. That was a big struggle for him that a lot of people remember, but it's not like the whole season was like that for him. So was it the best Mark Andrews season? No, but I do think that I don't think that he would have been the right choice here for this one. So I think some people might shout out Mark Andrews because they want him to play better. I honestly wonder if we're going to get a little bit of the passing of the torch this year at the tight end position, if they're really going to start to lean a lot more on Isaiah Likely. Not that Mark Andrews is not going to play a part, but we're seeing him get a little bit older. Sort of the same thing with Travis Kelce. It's like, okay, these aren't the offensive focal points that they were earlier in their career, and I wonder if we get to see a little bit of a switch there with those two guys. But Roquan, certainly everything is on his plate, as it always is, the middle linebacker in the middle of that defense. So I agree with you. I think that is the right choice there. For the Buffalo Bills, you went with a newcomer, or you went with a player who you're looking to see a bounce back from in a new spot here with edge rusher Joey Bosa. So, Bosa has been great when he has been healthy, but certainly as he's gotten a little bit older, the injuries are continuing to mount, and he's not quite the player he was earlier in his career. What are you expecting from Joey Bosa here as a bounce back candidate now in Buffalo?
I think the hope here, and he's already got an injury that's keeping him out, I think at least until training camp starts. The hope here is that he just regresses in a positive way back towards his career norms as a pass rusher, even going through the injuries he has in recent years. 2022, an 84 pass rush grade. 2023, an 80. That's 64.8 that you just saw right there. Last year is by far his career low, and I think what I would expect is with a pretty deep defensive line group now with the way they've built it, you've got Greg Rousseau, Michael Hoyt, Landon Jackson in the draft. You've got a whole kind of just this bunch of defensive linemen that can all rotate in and out. I think you kind of limit Joey Bosa's snap count like they did with Von Miller the last couple of years, because even in a part-time role, Miller was very, very effective. He just wasn't going to play 50, 60, 70 snaps a game anymore, right? So I think with Bosa in a rotational role, maybe even just a rotational pass rush role, with Hoyt as a run defender, with Landon Jackson as a run defender, with Rousseau out there every snap, I think you have this thing where, okay, if we can get him healthy, and then we can keep him healthy, playing him maybe 25 to 30 snaps a game instead of, again, 40 or 50 as he was with the Chargers. When he was healthy, he was playing every snap still. So I think that rotational role, Bosa's hit He's hit a point, and he's still not, it's not like he's an old player. He's going to be 30 years old this year, but it's just with all the injuries the last few years, you have to just limit the workload, right? And I think the Bills do have the ability to do that, and he could perform better like they just did the last few years with Von Miller. Put him in a part-time role, let him rush the passer, pin his ears back 25 times a game, and get the most out of him.
I'll shout out Teron Johnson as well, who I don't think had a bad year last year, but their starting nickel corner, I think could use a bounce-back season just because last year he gave up more than 100 yards than he did previously, gave up more yards after the catch, didn't have the forced fumble, still had some of the missed tackles, some of the, reception percentage allowed was a little bit less from him, and so it was fine. It's not like he had a terrible year, but I think that they would like for him to have a better year, as Buffalo is obviously trying to win a Super Bowl. The Super Bowl window is wide open, and it felt like it was a little bit of a step back last year. When you look at yards per catch averages allowed from Teron Johnson, it was more than 3 yards extra this past season than what it was the year before. So it just felt like he was giving up more big plays. He was giving up more yards after the catch, and obviously he didn't have as impactful plays with the forced fumbles. Now, forced fumbles isn't exactly a stable metric. You can't count on those year to year, but just more big plays allowed in 2024 than what we saw in 2023. And really, the last couple of years before then, 2021, 2022, 2023, really nice coverage scores from him, especially with him playing in the slot. So I would shout out him as well, getting to play a little bit better as their slot defender in Buffalo. The Carolina Panthers. You went with cornerback J.C. Horn. I think there's a number of players that you could have gone with here for Carolina who just did not have a very good year as a team last season. So you ultimately went with J.C. Horn, though. Talk to me about him. Why Horn?
So there are some positives here, right? He played 1,000 snaps in his career for the first time, so to see him healthy and playing every week, that's one positive. Set a career high with 9 pass breakups, set a career high with an 80.9 run defense grade, but if you're going to give a cornerback $25 million a year, got to be better than a 59.1 coverage grade. And I think this is a case kind of like I mentioned with D. Alford earlier where, okay, the rest of his defense has to get better. They were the lowest graded defense in the league across the board, right? The run defense wasn't working for him except for Horn, obviously. The pass rush, they were dead last in the league in pass rush grade, and I mentioned before, that hurts the secondary when you can't get any pressure on quarterbacks. And then I think even just the rest of the secondary and the Panthers getting Trayvon Merrick in there, getting Lathan Ransom in there, getting some new safeties in there just so this coverage unit can be cohesive, right? So, Horn, I think, needs a bounce back when it comes to his coverage grade. I won't sit here and tell you it's all his fault. We know he's a good football player, so what you want to see is him healthy for the second year in a row because he hasn't done that through 4 years in his career yet. It's been hurt and then healthy and then hurt and then healthy again. And then I think that bounce back just comes from, in part, the Panthers defense as a whole playing better, getting a better pass rush, being more cohesive in the secondary with the new safeties. I think Horn and Mike Jackson is a pretty solid cornerback duo. We're just going to get the production now behind it. So I think it's a bounce back from a career low coverage grade and just stay healthy and have a good season and prove you're worth all that money they paid you.
Yeah, I think that you're totally right with J.C. Horn being one of the top candidates that you want to see be great. In that same conversation, I would say Derek Brown as well, right? I mean, Derek Brown, he's coming off of injury. I understand that. He only played one game last year. In the one game, he didn't look very good, but Carolina just didn't look very good at the beginning of the year. Very clearly, they were not ready for the NFL season to begin, basically in any way. Bryce Young wasn't ready. The defense wasn't ready. The team just was not ready to start the season last year, Derek Brown included. So now he's coming off of a major injury, and you need him to have a bounce back year because in 2023, he was elite. He had a 90.1 defensive grade, and he is still the focal point of how they built their defense this offseason. I mean, they got a lot of guys around him in the interior to free him up to be whatever he needs to be within the formation, whether it's a nose tackle on one play, a 3 technique on the other, getting him out as a defensive end, like whatever it is, they're going to use Derek Brown in any way, and I think that their offseason reflected that. So I think by nature, Derek Brown is also a bounce-back candidate here. I think another one that fans would want us to shout out is Xavier Legette. Now, obviously, it's sort of like a bounce back to what? It was a rookie last year. It was just rookie struggles. But you want him to really, maybe he is more of a candidate who's like, okay, it's a breakout candidate more than a bounce back candidate. But no matter how you look at it, they need Legette to play a lot better. 8 drops last year, just a 59.1 receiving grade. And even with Tetsuo McMillan there, okay, there's not as much pressure on Legette to play as that X receiver, that on the line of scrimmage, wide receiver 1, guy who's getting the most targets. It's a little bit more flexible to put him in more advantageous situations instead of always having him out there on the field with a big load for him to play by. But I think that he just has to play better no matter what. So Xavier Legette, Derek Brown, I would throw their names into the mix as well. They have to play better in Carolina, and just straight up, the team has to start 2025 a lot better than they started 2024. Chicago Bears, you didn't go with AC/DC. Very clearly, they don't need a bounce back. They're already there. They're
still
already
on
in
top.
that prime still. You went with running back DeAndre Swift, who is once again reunited with Ben Johnson. Not sure that's the best thing in the world, because felt like Ben Johnson was okay getting rid of him when they were together in Detroit. But DeAndre Swift now with Ben Johnson again in that offense. What do you think about him being that bounce back candidate?
Well, they didn't take a running back very high in this draft, so he must be at least content with Swift's presence there. And I'll tell you, it's funny because he didn't play a whole lot, and they were content to get rid of him. But when he did in 2022 under Ben Johnson as his offensive coordinator, career-high rushing grade, career-high yards per attempt, career-high yards after contact per attempt, career-high missed tackles forced per attempt, just all of it. It was actually, in a small sample, the best that Swift has ever run the football. So if you get that this year, and even if it's, say, 50-50 with Roschon Johnson or Kyle Monangai has kind of worked in there, Swift at least does know the system, and we've seen him have success in it before, and it's very clear with the offensive line rebuild that this Bears team is going to want to run the football. There's no question about that. That's Ben Johnson's identity first and foremost. Get in the run game, get in the play-action game, and I think, look, they didn't take – we expected them to take, maybe – get a Quinshon Judkins or Travion Henderson, somebody like that in the draft, or if Ashton Ginty would have fallen to them. None of those guys fell to them. They waited to the 7th round to take it back. Swift is going to be a big part of this offense, right? And if he plays like he did, at least in that small sample in 2022, even if it's a rotational role, then you've still got a pretty good football player who can do some things, right? The Bears, they didn't run block very well last year with Dahlman and Tooney and Jackson in there on the inside with the 2 tackles. It should be a lot better, and Ben Johnson's going to have more of a cohesive emphasis on running the football than Shane Waldron did last year. So I think if there's anybody that's going to benefit from Ben Johnson coming in, ironically enough, and the offensive line remake, aside from Caleb Williams, obviously, it's going to be DeAndre Swift.
I'd throw Austin Booker in there as well, and he's a little bit of the same conversation of what we were talking about with Xavier Legette, where it's like, all right, bounce back from what? He's just a rookie last year, but I think he struggled. I think that he struggled throughout the draft season trying to figure out what the ideal weight was for him, how much weight he wanted to have on his body. Did he want to be a little bit stronger? Did he want to continue to have a little bit more agility, be lighter on his feet? So I'm hoping that he kind of went through this offseason. It's like, okay, I've now gone through all right, I've been a little bit heavier, I've been a little bit lighter, because there were concerns that he didn't have enough weight when he was at Kansas. But at Kansas, he had an 80.1 pass rushing grade, and he was a really good pass rusher, even just as a redshirt sophomore and in his first year as a starter. So I think he was really trying to figure out what was best for him as a rookie. I get a little bit worried. I don't want him to fall into the Noah Spence bucket, because I remember covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers back in 2017 and 2018 when they drafted and had Noah Spence on the team, and Noah Spence was kind of the same thing. He started his career at Ohio State, then he went to Eastern Kentucky, and he was a really great pass rusher, but he was a really great pass rusher at like 230, 235 pounds. And so he gets to the NFL, and he's like, okay, I got to get way bigger. And they beef him up all the way to like 250, 255, somewhere between that. And he then just wasn't explosive. And so then it was this weird mix of like, okay, well, when I'm a lighter weight where I'm more comfortable, I'm not powerful enough. When I'm near 250, like I'm not quick enough. And so he sort of got in this no man's land of he was not able to find a comfortable home weight where he felt the most confident when it came to a speed and strength combination. And I don't want that to happen with Booker, because I think Booker, like Spence, is a really talented pass rusher, but Spence just could not find a weight that allowed him to be consistent. And I'm really hoping that that is the case with Austin Booker, and it's a little bit of a bounce back in that regard, more towards the player that we saw when he was at Kansas. So wanted to shout him out as well. Again, it's a little bit different because he was just a rookie last year, but can he bounce back to a place where he's playing confidently? Because I don't think that he was doing that nearly as much last season. For the Cincinnati Bengals, you went with safety Geno Stone. I agree wholeheartedly. I think this is the one that we've got to point to. There's a couple of guys on the defense where you need them to play better, no doubt about it. But Geno Stone was a player who, when they signed him, I was like, okay, like now they've got a really good safety player, and he just was not reliable for them last season. So I totally agree with you. But why did you pick Geno Stone here?
Yeah, it wasn't reliable. It was a career worst season for him. But I think when you look at the fit, or I should say the lack of fit in Lou Anarumo's defense, it just didn't work, right? Lou Anarumo likes to mess around with a lot of different complex zone coverages and too high looks and things like that. I think if there's anybody that could benefit from Al Golden coming in as the Bengals defensive coordinator, it's Geno Stone, because he's most comfortable as a single high center field free safety, right? Kind of like Xavier McKinney in Green Bay, kind of like Javon Holland now going to the Giants. It's the same idea. Nobody in college football ran more single high defenses than Al Golden did last year in Notre Dame. I think you put Stone in the same role he had Xavier Watson. Just throw him back there as the center fielder. Don't ask him to do too much in the box. Find other guys, Jordan Battle or whoever else can do that, and let Stone play center field. Let him ball hawk. Let him just go get the interceptions. He led the league in interceptions the year before in 2023, right? So I think in this role in Al Golden's defense, if he's going to be more aggressive and he's going to run a lot more single high defenses than Lou Anarumo did, Stone's going to be he's going to be a beneficiary of that. I really believe that. I think it's a better role for him. Last year, he just never looked comfortable in Anarumo's defense, and it showed. The Bengals ran the 6th fewest single high defenses in the league last year. It's going to be a totally different operation. It's going to be more aggressive. There's going to be more man coverage. Maybe not quite at the rate that Notre Dame did last year, dominating everybody 60% of the time with cover one. But Stone, I think, as the center fielder, as a single high safety back there, is going to look a lot better this year.
Yeah, would love for the offensive line to play a little bit better as well. Ted Karras is somebody who I know can play really, really well, and it just felt like as a unit it was really tough last year. Interior offensive line, it's a lot like a caterpillar, right? I mean, all the legs have to be moving in the right direction. If one of them is not, then that's a major weak point for you, and you're not even going to be able to move forward. So I think that for the Bengals, Karras is the one who I have the most faith in to be able to play at a much higher level, because we've seen him do it before. So would love for him to have a little bit more of a bounce back season, and for that interior offensive line to be better as well. The Cleveland Browns, you went with cornerback Greg Newsome here for them as their bounce-back candidate. So talk to me about him in the secondary.
Yeah, obviously all the focus this offseason is going to be on the Browns' offense, but their defense is actually still pretty darn good, and the one flaw with it last year was the play of their cornerbacks, especially Greg Newsome and Martin Emerson. But I'm going with Newsome as the bounce-back guy. Career-low 54 coverage grade last year, but for 3 years before that, he played a lot better. You look at his coverage grade, 70, 72, 69. I mean, that's all passable stuff, especially with Newsome operating both inside and outside, out wide and in the slot. So I think you have a guy who just, look, this secondary, the cornerback room specifically, did not play well last year altogether. Denzel Ward, still good in man coverage, still got a whole lot of pass breakups, but even he struggled at times. But I think Newsome's a guy who's pretty easy to project to bounce back, at least to the level he'd played the rest of his career, right? I'm not saying he's going to bounce back into being a star, but somewhere around a 70 coverage grade would be a big improvement back to where he was the first 3 years of his career. So I would expect that from him. We'll see if we get that out of Martin Emerson in Cleveland as well, and then you're looking like a really, really good defense, especially after re-signing Myles Garrett. But that's really the one area of this defense that struggled was the cornerbacks, and I think Newsome is at the forefront of improving that.
You know, I'm gonna shout out the interior offensive line here for Cleveland as well, specifically Joel Bitonio and Wyatt Teller, and I feel like I just have not heard a lot of concern for the offensive line in Cleveland, especially for that interior. But these guys did not play well last year, and these are your all-pros who are getting older, right? I mean, Wyatt Teller had the worst single-season PFF grade since 2019, and he's about to be 31 years old, so he's not getting any younger. And then Joel Bitonio had his career low in overall PFF grade last year, and he is 33 going on 34. So these are your all-pro guards, these all-pro offensive linemen, because Bitonio's played a little bit of guard and a little bit of tackle, that are getting older and really struggled last season. If these guys don't bounce back in a big way, holy cow, Cleveland's offensive line's in trouble. Like, if they have years like they had the previous season and you go, they're just kind of over the hill. It's time. They were all pros for us. They helped anchor one of the best offensive lines in the NFL over the last couple of years, but it's just their time. They're not playing at that level anymore. If that's the case with those guys, if they don't have bounce back years, Cleveland's in trouble. Like, Cleveland's offense is in big trouble, let alone with them still trying to figure out the quarterback position. I mean, they're going to have a lot of spots that they have to improve over the next 2 years. And it's a little bit of what made the Myles Garrett extension kind of perplexing. I mean, obviously money talks, and he's one of the richest football players in the NFL now, but there was talk about him wanting to win and wanting to be in a winning culture and a winning situation. They better hope that these two specifically along the offensive line bounce back this year, because if they don't, this franchise got real problems on their roster moving forward. You're looking at a multi-year rebuild then with those offensive trenches if these guys can't bounce back to a level that you want to. And maximum, you're going to get 2 years from them anyways. Even if they bounce back, maximum, you're going to get 2 years out of these guys. So I'm a little bit worried about Cleveland. I think that you're hitting the panic button if these guys don't have bounce back seasons, because you really need it from them, in my opinion.
Trev, it's exactly why they drafted a quarterback who's used to middling at best pass protection as Shedeur Sanders. It's exactly why they did it. That's the whole point. See that? You just got to find players that fit your team, and Sanders he fits in that sense. He fits. He's used to it. He's used to the chaos.
True.
See that?
That's true. Yeah. Anytime that you can purposefully put an aging or underperforming offensive line in front of your young quarterback, you have to do it.
Works every time.
Dallas Cowboys, you picked Dak Prescott here as the bounce back candidate. Dak, I think, is probably number one for most people, just because he did not have a great year last year, even when he was out there and he was healthy. The year before, we had him second in the NFL in terms of the MVP race. So obviously it's very understanding of why you could expect a bounce back year from him. But talk to me about Dak.
Actually, this was the easiest pick, like you just mentioned, of this entire list. I mean, a guy who finished second in the MVP voting in 2023, goes in last year and has the worst year of his career, and then misses the second half of it with an injury. Worst passing grade of his career, second worst yards per attempt, worst turnover-worthy play rate. I think there's a bounce back, one, just for the fact that he's always played better than that. It was his worst year in the league. And two, I love this George Pickens trade, that with Dallas getting him in there as a vertical threat, as a second threat, aside from CeeDee Lamb, right? This offense has always operated best when CeeDee Lamb has a second threat that can take the top off, get the safeties out of the box vertically, and Lamb can work his magic underneath and make plays after the catch. That didn't happen last year. There was way too much attention to Lamb with no other legitimate threats. Look, I like Jalen Tolbert, I like Kevontae Turpin, but they don't get vertical in the same way that George Pickens does. To have that threat of an X-receiver that can win vertically down the field is going to open up the entire offense. I think Dak's in for a bounce back. I think CeeDee Lamb's in for a big year. And I think George Pickens, honestly, could still have just as much success, if not more, as he did in Pittsburgh, right? As that just kind of vertical specialist that opens everything up for the rest of this offense. So to me, Dak was the easiest player on this list. It was just got to the Cowboys, pencil him in, Dak Prescott, bounce back, no question.
Osa Odigizua hasn't been known as like a run defender as what he brings to the team. He's been a better pass rusher than he has been a run defender, but he certainly needs to bounce back from a near career low in run defense grades, just because next to him was Mozzie Smith, and Mozzie Smith now back-to-back seasons has been bad at run defense. And so I just think that out of necessity, we need Osa Odigizua to play better as a run defender. And so to me, it just needs to be a bounce back year for him and the rest of the Cowboys defensive line to be a better run defense unit. But I think that they will be even naturally with it being a new season, because it was terrible last year, especially to start. They got better in the second half of the season, but man, they were not ready to defend the run when the season opened. But I don't think that those outweigh the importance of Dak needing to bounce back. Denver Broncos, you picked a new one, a newcomer here. Safety Talanoa Hufanga, who comes over in free agency from the San Francisco 49ers. Missed some time due to injury. He's a little banged up, but also just not great grades overall for him in 2024. What's with Talanoa Hufanga as the pick here, and what do you expect for him now in Vance Joseph's team?
He's in a more ideal role, because I think what you had in San Francisco is with him and Jair Brown and Malik Mustafa, you had so many box safeties, and all of them, when they were in a free safety kind of role, were just kind of out of place, and Hufanga was one of those guys. But going to Denver, and I think this is why Sean Payton and George Payton and these guys targeted Hufanga, was the fit alongside Brandon Jones, who is one of the best pure free safeties in football. When he was lined up at free safety, he had the highest coverage grade in the league last year. He could only do it 50% of the time, though, because P.J. Locke wasn't great in the box. Now, Hufanga's grades, even when he's struggled, they've always been better when he's lined up in the box or even in the slot. He's just more comfortable down closer to the line of scrimmage. So I'm expecting for both of those guys to be even better. And Jones was spectacular last year in his first year in Denver. It could be even better and more of an ideal role, playing free safety more often. They're going to play a lot of cover three, a lot of single high, and I think Hufanga is going to see a bounce back as long as he's healthy because he's in a more ideal role where he can just stay in the box, defend the run, defend the pass down closer to the line of scrimmage, and you're not asking him to play back deep very often. That's not his wheelhouse. He wants to be down towards the line of scrimmage, almost like an extra linebacker, and with Brandon Jones next to him, he's going to be allowed to do that. I think he went somewhere where he can get in an ideal role for his skill set.
Yeah, the other player that I'd shout out is Riley Moss. And look, he didn't play a ton when he was a rookie, and so better PFF grades as a rookie. It's a very small sample size there. Played a lot last season, but he struggled. I mean, it was a 59.8 coverage grade there for him. I think that he needs to have a bounce-back season for them because even with them drafting Jahdae Barron, you need a pretty deep cornerback room. I think that we're seeing that in the NFL. It's not just, hey, we need 2 good corners to be able to play on the outside. No, you need 3. You need 1 to be a little bit of a nickel defender slot specialist for you. And then if your corners go down, you got to have guys who could step in. So you've got to have players that you can rely upon. And Riley Moss, even if he is not a full-time starter this year, which it looks like he still could be a full-time starter, depending on how they want to deploy Jahdae Barron and exactly what they're going to do with that rotation there, he's going to play a good amount. So maybe not as many snaps as the year before, but he's still going to play plenty. I think that Riley Moss needs to have a bounce-back year from what we saw last season. Detroit Lions, one of the most stacked rosters in the NFL, still is. You went with DJ Reader, their interior defensive lineman. I agree wholeheartedly with this one. He's the one that has to have a bounce back because as a consistent run defender throughout his entire career, he has really taken a step back or took a step back last season. Aleem McNeil was great next to him. You're hoping Aiden Hutchinson could be even a fraction of what he looked like last year before he got hurt. But DJ Reader needs to bounce back to that run defense level. So I like the pick here.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting with Reader. He had the lowest graded season of his career, and he actually played the most snaps that he's played since 2021. And I actually wonder, another guy you didn't mention there, first-round pick Tyleik Williams, I should say. Between him and Reader and Aleem McNeil, and McNeil's coming back off the injury, I wonder if that rotation actually helps Reader as he's getting a little bit older here into his early 30s, that he can play, just like Joey Bosa in Buffalo, he can play a little bit less and be a little more effective with that snap count. Instead of playing 560 snaps, play something more in the low 400s and get the job done in run defense when he needs to. And then you put Tyleik in there, who's an excellent run defender, and you have the same level of effectiveness. So I think, look, when it comes to run defense, the Lions have a deep defensive line. Pass rush and off the edge, maybe not as much behind Hutchinson, but they have a lot of run defenders that can be effective from multiple alignments. So I think Reader would really benefit here from playing a handful less snaps as he's getting older. Tyleik Williams coming in there, taking some of those reps. Obviously, Aleem McNeil getting back healthy. There was a lot of pressure on Reader, especially after McNeil got hurt last year. Take some of that pressure off, get the rotation a little bit deeper, and I think Reader can get back to the run defense that we're used to from his previous seasons.
I do agree that I think that he has to play a lot better if they're going to get where they want to go. For the Packers, there are a couple candidates here. I wasn't thinking about the guy that you wrote down here. You went with quarterback Jordan Love. So talk to me about why Jordan Love is your bounce back candidate here for the Packers.
Look, down the stretch in 2023, he was a top 5 quarterback in football. That's how well he played into that playoff run, beating Dallas in the playoffs and then eventually losing to San Francisco. But when you look at the second half of 2023, it looked like he was on the road to superstardom, right? And then last year, it was a big step back. You see the 74.3 passing grades, a drop off, 3.4% big-time throw rate for a guy with his arm talent, his ability, that's actually pretty low and too close to his turnover-worthy play rate. And then that last number is the one. I know I've been harping on it for months on end, but getting Matthew Golden in as a deep threat not only helps them deep down the field, but it gets safeties out of the intermediate windows where Love was so successful in that hot stretch in 2023. I think that is what they were missing, the vertical threat that Matthew Golden gives them, that Christian Watson was supposed to give him anytime he was healthy, which wasn't very often. I think all of a sudden this offense gets opened up and they can play the balance of manipulating safeties, manipulating defenses, because you've got Josh Jacobs in the run game. He's going to be really good. He was amazing last year, right? Golden now to take the top off is a different level than what you had in the passing game last year when the windows were just too tight. You could feel secondaries creeping in because nobody was a threat over the top, right? And then you had guys dropping balls and struggling to beat man coverage. So I think there is just a level when you're looking for the optimism with Jordan Love, and he did. There were times when he struggled last year, and he was forcing passes and getting back into some of his old habits that he struggled with in the first half of 2023, right? I think you're talking about a guy who's in the right situation to succeed. He now has to just make the right throws and trust his read and get the ball to the right windows of the defense.
I just wonder how much faith he had in his receiver room that was largely inconsistent outside of Jaden Reed. I agree with you completely about Matthew Golden. We talked about this being one of our favorite landing spots of any player in the 2025 NFL draft because of what his skill set could mean to Green Bay and, by proxy, a bounce back from Jordan Love being a little bit more efficient yet remaining explosive. I think it's a major candidate for this has to be Dontavian Wicks as well. Because, we're expecting Matthew Golden to come in and play right away and play really well, but he's still a rookie, and that's never a guarantee. So with Christian Watson out, you have Romeo Doubs, but he's got his concussion history. Dontavian Wicks has to play for this team. He has to play significant snaps, at least in the first half of the season, and he has to be a lot more reliable than he was last year. 9 drops from him, a 29.0 drop grade, 18% drop percentage last season. I mean, that is just nowhere near good enough to not just be a relied upon wide receiver, to even get on the field. You can't be dropping the ball 18% of the time on 18% of your targets and receptions. I mean, it's nowhere near where it needs to be. And it was not that bad the previous season. He only had 2 drops. He only had, I believe it was a 4.7 drop percentage the year before. And so he has to be much better. A true bounce back candidate year for him. He's got to be able to hold on to the football. And then the other one that I'd throw in there is just Jair Alexander. Not that he plays bad. He's just got to play more, right? He's got to bounce back to being fully healthy, right? It's kind of that JC Horn, what you talked about a little bit earlier. Now, JC played over 1,000 snaps last season, but Jair Alexander hasn't played over 1,000 snaps in 4 years, 5 years. I can't remember exactly what last year that was where he was able to play that full schedule, but they got to get close to that with him because they're going to need him in that secondary, there's no doubt. Houston Texans, you went with linebacker Christian Harris here in the middle. This was actually kind of a tough one, finding a bounce-back candidate, because it felt like a lot of players on Houston's team, okay, maybe they didn't have career years, but it's not like they bombed outside of the offensive linemen that are really no longer on the team that they've sort of moved on from here. So you ended up going with Christian Harris, their linebacker there. Talk to me about why.
Yeah, I mean, you start with his season last year. He suffered a calf injury in the preseason and held him out till week 15. It just kept bothering him, wasn't recovering, and he wasn't in till late in the season. Even late in the season when he came back, didn't quite look right. But you look at the year before, he had a 72 coverage grade that was a top 25 mark among linebackers. And I think in that kind of, maybe even in a specialized role, maybe he won't play as much as he did his first 2 years in this defense. But when you look at their other linebackers, Aziz Al-Shire, really good run defender, not great in coverage. Henry To'oTo'o, really good run defender, not great in coverage. Christian Harris can come in on third downs in passing situations, I think, and balance that out as long as he's healthy. He's got speed. He's got good instincts in coverage. He had the pick 6 in the playoff game against Cleveland a couple of years ago. I think when you look at what he can bring, as if Houston's pass defense needs to be any better with their edge rushers in the secondary and all of that, I think Christian Harris is actually a very important piece to balance out their linebacker room with a coverage player, with a guy with speed, with a guy who has those instincts in space and can get to the football out in the passing game. So I think maybe he won't play quite as much, the almost 900 snaps that he did in 2023, but there's a specialized role for him as a coverage linebacker that Houston was missing last year.
Walt in the chat is saying he'd pick Stroud as the bounce-back candidate here. I think that Stroud took a little bit of a step back here, but it's not as much as I think people would think. I think the biggest disappointment with Stroud is that he didn't take that second step, that next step in his sophomore season in the NFL, because it was largely the same when you look at a lot of the numbers there from him. And then you got to think about how the Texans' offensive line, specifically in their interior offensive line, one of the worst in the NFL. And the only reason I say one of the worst is because Seattle was absolutely abysmal as well, so I have to throw them into the equation. But when you look at these past 2 years, 2024 and 2023, 4.3% big-time throw percentage in 2024, 4.4 in 2023. So largely the same. 2.8 turnover-worthy plays in 2024, the exact same 2.8 in 2023. So some of the numbers are a little bit different. Like the adjusted completion percentage is a little bit down. It was 2% down than it was the year before, but the offensive line was worse than it was in 2020 it was worse in 2024 than it was in 2023. So I think that some of the negatives that we have for Stroud is a little bit versus expectations, but also a good chunk of that, in my opinion, was not really on him, and a lot of that was on the offensive line, the inability to really take that next step, be a little bit more consistent. So I see what Walt is talking about with Stroud. I was obviously disappointed, as other people were as well, but I wouldn't say that he is a major bounce back candidate. I think the offensive line more is, and whoever's going to be out there with their starting five. I'll also shout out Folo Fudukasi. He missed a little bit of time last season as an interior defender for them, career low in run defense grades when he was out there. So I think the floor for Fudukasi has to be a lot higher this upcoming season. Charvarius Ward for the Indianapolis Colts, that is your pick there. I agree. I think that if Ward has a bounce back year in his new spot now in Indianapolis, man, what a major boost to that defense that he could be. And certainly with Lou Anarumo there now as their defensive coordinator, I get really excited about what they have there in the secondary, where it was a big question mark for them the year before. So talk to me a little bit more about Ward.
Yeah, so if we talked about Geno Stone benefiting in Cincinnati from Lou Anarumo leaving, Ward is going to benefit from Anarumo coming into Indianapolis, right? And the big thing about that is he's one of the best zone coverage players when he's on. Last year, I think, he had some personal issues he was dealing with off the field. The vibe wasn't quite right in San Francisco, obviously. I think he might have even been dealing with a minor injury during the season. And he had his lowest coverage grade he's had in a long time. And I think you go back to 2023 and the success that he had then. Trev, he had the 10th best zone coverage grade in the league in 2023, and that's always been where he's most comfortable. That fits in perfectly with Lou Anarumo's defense and a team that needs a legitimate outside cornerback like that. You get him going. You still have Jalen Jones. You have Juju Brents coming back. You've got Kenny Moore in the slot. And then you've got also Cam Bynum, who they signed at safety. It feels like every time we talk about the Colts, we go, man, look at this team. If only they had a quarterback, and that includes this defense with the guys they've signed. And I think Ward's at the very front of that. I think he's in for a big bounce back with Anarumo as his defensive coordinator, and just a regular offseason to not have to deal with all the things that he dealt with last year. I think he's going to be really good in Indianapolis.
Yeah, I think that Jonathan Taylor could also be another candidate here. I think that when you look at his overall yard, 1,400 rushing yards. I'm not trying to say that like anybody can do that. I absolutely don't think that that's the case. But his efficiency numbers, I think, are just a lot lower than they have been in the past. Certainly, yards after contact, he's gotten lower almost every single season over the last 4 seasons. Yards per attempt's a little bit higher, but the yards before contact was really strong for Jonathan Taylor. And so he was not as dynamic individually as I think that he has been in the past. And I think that him becoming a more closer version to that dynamic back, where it doesn't matter exactly what the offensive line's doing in front of you, he's playing a little bit more explosively. I think that he is a candidate there, but I do agree with you. If Ward can bounce back in a favorable defensive system, I think that would go a long way for this team. And people will throw out, okay, like what about Anthony Richardson? I can't really bring up Anthony Richardson to you because you would say, like, bounce back from what? He's never been good. So I think that I wasn't even going to bring that up.
We could get a Daniel Jones. We could get a Daniel Jones bounce back.
That could be. I think that Colts
possible
fans would get very upset and would immediately turn off the show if we brought up something like that. But one of the quarterbacks has to break out. I don't know if bounce back is maybe the right word, maybe in certain spurts for both of those guys. But anyways, we digress there. Jacksonville Jaguars, speaking of quarterbacks, you picked Trevor Lawrence. I agree with you. I think that Lawrence, what was it? Was it a year and a half ago? He had that stretch in the second half of the season or in the middle part of the season where, like, man, he looked like a top 8 quarterback in the NFL. And it looked like he had arrived. I believe that was his second year in the league. And we're like, okay, now Trevor Lawrence is absolutely going to take off. And he really didn't. I mean, with Trevor Lawrence and Jordan Love are very similar quarterbacks, in my opinion, on similar paths where it's like you can pick stretches where they've been phenomenal, but it hasn't been all the time. And I understand the football is a team game. It's not always going to be ideal situations, but even with them, the floor for both of those players is lower than I want it to be right now. And I think that's where I would agree with you about Trevor Lawrence. But what did you think about him? What's the reasons why you chose him as the bounce back candidate?
I think if Dak Prescott was the easiest player to pick for this list, I think Trevor Lawrence is the player that his team needs the most to bounce back out of anybody, right? It has to be built around him and Brian Thomas Jr. and now Travis Hunter. And it's, you mentioned, I like that you mentioned the Jordan Love comparison because I see a lot of similar problems when Lawrence goes cold and when he gets in those stretches where he's struggling, he's trying to do too much. He's trying to force the football down the field. And I think what Liam Cohen is going to come in and do, because he emphasized yards after catch so well in Tampa Bay, is that he's going to get Lawrence, hey, you've got great athletes. Look at these two great receivers you have. Just throw the ball underneath, let them do the work, and they'll rack up the stats for you, and then we can take shots when they're available. I think it's a very similar problem you have in Jacksonville and in Green Bay about just, look, run the offense. Stop trying to carry this thing. Run the offense, run the plays we call, and get after it with these two receivers. And Lawrence having Thomas and Hunter, you couldn't ask for any better than that, especially with their commitment to playing Hunter offensively at wide receiver now. So I'm with you. The hot stretches of Trevor Lawrence are as good as any quarterback in football. You do have to raise that floor, and you got to stop taking so many shots downfield. Because, look, I understand all the big-time throws that Trevor Lawrence brings you. Absolutely always brings you a high big-time throw rate. But you can't force it, right? And there's too many times where he forces it. I think with Liam Cohen calling the plays and with Travis Hunter and Brian Thomas there as the 1 and 2, or 1A, 1B, whatever you want to call it, because I think Hunter could be that good. I think Lawrence, they need a bounce back from him more than anything. I can't guarantee that it's coming. We'll see what happens with their pass protection. But I think they need it more than any team on this list.
Yeah, Brian in the chat is saying Travis Etienne as well. I think that's a really good shout out there, because when you look at Travis Etienne, I keep Trevor and Travis. It's just like I still can't get it right now that they're both in the NFL. When you look at Travis's numbers with the Jacksonville Jaguars this past season, career low in yards per attempt, career low in yards after contact per attempt, and by far a career low in total missed tackles forced. I mean, like that number is significantly low. He had 150 attempts this past season. He had 267 the year before, so 117 extra carries there for him. He had 64 missed tackles forced in 2023, just 17 in 2024. That's not even the same running back. So you're talking career low in total yards per attempt, yards after contact per attempt, and then without question, missed tackles forced per attempt. They need a huge bounce back year from him. It feels like he's probably trending towards, this is his last year in Jacksonville, but for this offense to be better and for it to be what it wants to be in Liam Cohen's first year, they absolutely need him to once again be closer to the dynamic version that he was the year before. Speaking of running backs, you picked Isaiah Pacheco for the Kansas City Chiefs. Certainly injury is a big reason why he wasn't as effective last year as he was in years past, but I do agree with you. I think the lack of consistency in the run game is something that this team was severely missing. And when I think about bounce back candidates, I would agree with you. I think that this is the player to choose, and I would also be choosing Isaiah Pacheco.
Yeah, he's the guy that's got to give him balance. And you look at last year, broke his leg in week 2, came back late in the season, and he just never looked right? And we know he's a better football player than he showed last year. Only a 65 rushing grade, only 7 missed tackles forced on 96 attempts. I mean, he's better than that. We know he's better than that, and he just wasn't right. Get a healthy offseason going, get back from the broken femur that he had last year, and just come back to be the same physical back that you used to be in your first 2 years, and give the Chiefs a balance and get behind. Look, I know the offensive line is shaky, but there's still a pretty darn good run blocking unit, especially behind Creed Humphrey on the inside. So I think Pacheco is going to be just fine. I really do. They're going to want to run the ball. Andy Reid always wants balance, and he just has to come back and be the football player he was his first 2 years.
All right, we're halfway through. We got 16 more teams. We're talking about bounce-back candidates for every single team in the NFL, but take a little break to talk to all the parents out there. Ask you a question of what's your child's future success look like for you? Maybe it's them owning their own business. Maybe it's them just living in their own house very comfortably. Maybe it's them getting to travel the world. Okay, whatever it is, you can help them achieve that right now with the Kids Investment Account from Fabric by Gerber Life. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a Kids Investment Account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. The whole thing is online. Setting up an account could take you as little as just 5 minutes, and then you manage your child's account right from their phone. Kids can't invest while they're minors, but this Kids Investment Account allows you to invest on their behalf and gives their investments so much more time to grow. The funds can be used for anything. It's not just when they're older. When they're younger, maybe it's tuition, tutors, music classes, sports, whatever. And then maybe when they're older, it's you helping them buy their first car, their first house, starting a business, traveling the world, whatever that looks like. It starts at just $20. There's no contribution limits to it. It's got tax advantages. Funds are SIPC insured up to $500,000. There's no commission fees to it, just a low, flat monthly maintenance fee. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family and start investing in your child's future today at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL, MEET, fabric.com/PFFNFL. The portfolios are managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors Incorporated. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Learn more at meetfabric.com. All right, hopefully GM Walt's still in the chat. We're talking about his Las Vegas Raiders here. You went with edge rusher Malcolm Kuntz as the guy that you really want to see as their bounce back candidate. Why'd you go with Kuntz here?
Yeah, I think it's just what we saw. He didn't play a single snap last year, got hurt before the season, but what we saw in the second half of 2023 was just spectacular. From weeks 10 through 18 of that year, he had the 9th best pass rush grade in the NFL, and you put that right next to Max Crosby and Christian Wilkins on the inside, and you go, this could be a dynamic pass rushing unit. They have a lot of work to do in the back seven and in coverage, lowest coverage grade in the league last year, but if Kuntz bounces back from his injury and shows us what he showed us the second half of 2023, this could be a really darn good defensive line, because we know they give you a chance to win with Max Crosby on one side, but if Kuntz plays like he did in 2023, Christian Wilkins needs a bounce back also. I'm sure you're going to mention him as well, coming off an injury last year also, but I think this is somebody we're constantly looking for. Okay, who's going to help Max Crosby off the other side on the edge? Is it going to be Tyree Wilson? Last year, Caleb Von Chason did a little bit, I believe. Now you've got Malcolm Kuntz coming back. You just are constantly looking for that other guy to get the double and triple teams off Crosby, and Kuntz showed at one point he could be that guy. He's just got to come off the injury and do it again.
Yeah, well, first of all, Walt gives you the seal of approval, gives you the thumbs up, says, of course, it's Malcolm Kuntz there. I was going to mention Christian Wilkins as well, just him being fully healthy, getting back on that defensive line. I would say sort of the other player that I want to mention here is just Devin White. Now, bouncing back to what? I mean, his career grades in the NFL have sort of been in the 40s and 50s, but he had that run when the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were running through the Super Bowl in the playoffs specifically, where he looked unbelievable. Now, that was a short stint of time in his career, but I would say that the Raiders are going to need him simply because they're losing Robert Spillane, who over the last 2 seasons combined, I believe he was 3rd for off-ball linebackers in the NFL in total run defense grade. And so you need to pick up the pieces there with him no longer there. Now he is in New England. So I would just shout out Devin White of like, hey, can he have a bounce back to at least playing confident again in this system? Whatever it is, he's just got to really help elevate the run defense there, because they're losing a lot with Spillane no longer in the middle of that defense. So I would shout him out there as well. In the chat, Walt and Brian were going back and forth kind of talking about Liam Cohen, and Brian was like, hey, Trevor's a Tampa Bay guy, and Walt was like, hey, is Liam Cohen even all that? I think Liam Cohen's really good. Now, as an offensive coordinator, when you put on the head coaching headset and the head coaching hat, things are different. You become a little bit more of a CEO. It's like anytime you're going up in your company, when you climb the ladder, it just means that you're probably doing less work, and you're instead just managing more people. That's what happens when you become a head coach. And so is Liam Cohen going to be good at the CEO stuff? I don't know. I know he's a great offensive mind. He's a great offensive coordinator. We saw that during his time when he was at Kentucky, his couple of stints there with the Los Angeles Rams as well, and then what he was able to do in Tampa's offense last year with all those weapons. I think he is a good offensive coordinator and play caller, but to say that somebody's a good head coach is often a very different story because of everything that then is put on your plate. So that would be my response to Liam Cohen, but I figured that I would just address that there. Before we move on to the Los Angeles Chargers, your choice here for a bounce-back player is Tuli Tuipulotu, their edge rusher there. Obviously, no Joey Bosa there. They moved on from him. We talked about him bouncing back, but instead for the Buffalo Bills. So you went with Tuli Tuipulotu instead. Your thoughts on him?
Yeah, the pass rush production was pretty similar to his rookie year. Not that it was fantastic, but another 43 pressures and 9 sacks. What I'm looking at is a bounce back in run defense, where as a rookie, he was one of the best players in football, an 88.4 run defense grade. That dropped all the way down to a 66 last year, which is still a decent mark. You can obviously be on the field with that, but considering what he showed us in his rookie season, I think this is the ultimate bounce back. We'll see. They were kind of having a 4-man rotation off the edge with him and Bosa, Khalil Mack, Bud Dupree, but I think Tuipulotu, he led that group in snaps. He's going to do so again this year, most likely. And I'm looking for just that every down dominance that he showed you in his rookie year when he had an elite run defense grade. If he gets that back and even gets a little bit better as a pass rusher, you could be talking about something eventually close to a Pro Bowl level season out of Tuipulotu, but he's just got to get back to it. I think just a sophomore slump a little bit. You get that sometimes teams adjust, they get your habits, they figure out, how you're going to operate for an entire season. I think the bounce back in run defense is going to be crucial to his success and to the success of the Chargers' whole front seven.
Yeah, Alohi Gilman is somebody else who I would just shout out when you look at sort of the bigger plays that he was able to make in coverage from 2023 to 2024. Wasn't able to make as many of those big plays, but I do think that he is still a really good player for them. And I think the coverage, I think the gap in the coverage grade, it's a little harsh on him. I think it's probably a little bit closer in the middle, but just continuing to allow him to be an impactful player there on the back end in that secondary as they're trying to figure out, like, hey, what the best rotation is with a lot of new guys and young guys that are in that secondary as well. So Tuli Tuipulotu is a good choice for you. I would also throw in Alohi Gilman. He could play even better than what we saw there in 2024. For the Rams, you went with quarterback Matthew Stafford. I have a different player here, but I'll let you talk about Stafford first because I thought Stafford was solid last year. I really did. I thought there were great moments. There were certainly the turnover-worthy plays, which you're going to deal with how Matthew Stafford likes to play, but why'd you pick Stafford here for the Rams?
So it's funny because you look on the surface and you go, yeah, he had a really solid year. He did. He darn near got him to the NFC title game, almost beating Philly in Philadelphia. But you also look at some of the numbers. It was his second worst passing grade in the last 9 years. It was his worst turnover-worthy play rate since 2017. And you look at the supporting cast and what was around him last year, especially in pass protection. Look, Stafford's an older quarterback. He's not going to move around a whole lot. And he was one of the worst quarterbacks in football under pressure. So hopefully what the answer is here, more so than Stafford bouncing back, is just he's better protected. The Rams had the third worst pass blocking grade in the league last year. We saw that early when they started 1-4. It's because they couldn't pass protect. The weeks when they can pass protect and they have enough clean pockets for him, they're going to win. That's what you have with Matthew Stafford at this point in his career. At his age, they just need to do it more often. So, look, he put up solid numbers with the third worst pass blocking unit in the league. If they're even closer to average or better than that, look, they re-signed Alaric Jackson. The interior is healthy. Coleman Shelton at center gives you a veteran that's familiar with the system. If they get a lot better in pass protection, he could get back to having passing grades up in the mid to high 80s, even close to 90s again, right? But that's what you need. You just can't have Stafford under pressure as often as they did last year, because at this point, and look, we're used to back in the day, he could improvise and he could get out of the pocket and do all those things. As you get older, you can't do that. He needs clean pockets. He can read a defense with the best of them. He still has the arm. Protect him. He can have an elite season, but I do need a bounce back from Stafford and the offensive line. It's really kind of a combo thing there for them to really compete for a championship.
I'll go to the cornerback room and I'll say Darius Williams, just because, again, a little bit similar to how we talked about Alohi Gilman. He just didn't quite have the impactful plays. I think that he was solid overall when you look at the receiving percentage allowed. It was 59.3 in 2023. It was 60.9 in 2024. So not that big of a difference. Yards per reception allowed. It was 12 in 2023. It was 13 in 2024. So again, not that big of a difference. Yards after catch, 178 last year, 178 in 2023, I should say, and then 150 last year. So pretty much the same. The big difference in why his coverage grade went from an 85.3 to a 59.8 last season is in 2023, he had 4 interceptions and 15 passes defended, PBUs. And in 2024, he had 1 interception and just 5 PBUs there from him. So just didn't have those impactful plays as much, and I think he's got to step up as that CB1. I looked at corner as a need for the Los Angeles Rams, and they really didn't touch it much. They're very comfortable, it seems, with the depth that they have there. Darius Williams on the outside, Akilla Witherspoon on the outside as well. So those two guys, and Darius Williams just getting some more impact plays there in the secondary, I think will go a long way. Miami Dolphins, Jalen Waddle. I completely agree with you here. I think you could pick Tua, but Tua's health is part of this as well. And you could pick Tyreek Hill, but again, for the wide receiver rankings, I went and I watched Tyreek Hill's film, and it's like Tyreek Hill's kind of still the same guy. Like, it's just the offense just was not nearly as good last year, especially when Tua was not in the lineup. Jalen Waddle, a little bit of that same thought process. I mean, he just took a step back just because the offense in general took a step back, but they really need him to continue to be one of the best number 2 wide receivers in the NFL, or at least one of the most dynamic wide receiver 2s in the NFL, because when you have a player like Tyreek Hill, which everyone in the secondary has to have their eyes on at all times, that frees up a player like Waddle to do a lot of great things for you, and he just didn't have that type of a season. So I agree with you. This would also be the big one for me. He's got to play a lot better. What do you think about Waddle and why he made the pick here?
Yeah, it's partially about Waddle, and it's a good amount about Tua, because when you really look at the cold stretch of Waddle's season last year, it was, of course, the weeks when Tua was hurt, right? And I think Waddle's just the guy that was hurt the most in his production when Tua's off the field, when Tua's out for extended stretches with injury and things like that. So I think when you look at the games when Tua did play, he looked like Jalen Waddle. It's just the total production, a career lows across the board, only 744 yards, only 3 missed tackles for us, which is odd for Jalen Waddle. He's so good after the catch. I think you're just looking at a guy that, you go, if his quarterback is healthy for 17 games, he's going to have a really good season. We've seen it 3 times already before last year. Even we saw it within last year when Tua was healthy, 144 yards against New England. Week 1, a big week when Tua was healthy against Jacksonville. I think you just look at him going, okay, the situation's got to be better, right? I don't think, to me, I don't think there's anything wrong with Jalen Waddle at all. I think it's just a matter of the production being better with a healthy quarterback. Hill's going to produce. Hill's a Hall of Famer. He's going to produce no matter who's throwing him the football, but Waddle needs a starting quarterback out there for a whole season, have an elite season.
Minnesota Vikings, you went with defensive tackle Javon Hargrave, who comes in from free agency, and Hargrave hasn't looked exactly the same as we've seen, I would say, like 2-3 years ago, but maybe there is a little bit of a bounce back there for him on a pretty dang good defensive line there that Minnesota is putting together. This one was tough. Like this roster's really good. There's not a lot of players who are playing below expectation, as evidenced by a 14-win season from this team. And so a lot of those guys are playing to their potential. They really are. But if Hargrave can get anything close to what we saw, the version of him in, 2020, 2021, 2022, I mean, like, we're going to talk about a phenomenal defensive line here in Minnesota, which might be the final piece of the puzzle as long as J.J. McCarthy plays well. So I would agree with you on this Javon Hargrave selection.
Yeah, you look at all those numbers on the screen there, the pass rush grade, the pressure rate, the pass rush win rate across 2021 to 2023, those were all in the top 4 among qualified defensive tackles. You're talking about a guy who can rush the passer with the likes of Chris Jones and Dexter Lawrence and Quinnen Williams and all the elite players we have in the league. Not a great run defender, but they're going to figure that out as they go, and Brian Flores is always finding different fronts and blitz packages to work with that. But Hargrave, if he gives them that level of production coming off of torn triceps, if he gives them that level of production, look, this was the 5th worst interior pass rushing unit in the league last year. They got Hargrave, got Jonathan Allen as well, right? But I think Hargrave is the big piece. This is like the ultimate buy low, bounce back candidate free agent signing. If they get that level of production, this might be a top 5 defense in the NFL, because all of a sudden you talk about maybe Brian Flores doesn't have to blitz quite as much as he normally would. He's got Van Ginkel, he's got Jonathan Grenard. Now if he's got Hargrave at that level on the inside, he could send 4 and mess around with the coverage a lot more and do really whatever he wants at any time. But that was the one thing really missing from this defense last year, was an interior pass rush. If you get that level from Hargrave, you got a serious problem when you're playing the Vikings.
Yeah, and I think it's a good spot specifically for Hargrave, because you mentioned, has he been one of the better run defenders in the NFL over the last, 5-6 years, or just the term of his career? No, but now he's in a defense where they defend the run by attacking, right? They defend the run by throwing bodies at the line of scrimmage, and so it's a lot less of, hey, we need you to 2-gap here as an interior defender, and it's more of, hey, we're going to slash you in between the gaps here, get into the backfield, even when they're running the football, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to play a pin our ears back type of a run defense strategy, and I think that Hargrave is perfect for that. So we'll see if he can get back to form. If he can, I think he's in the perfect spot in that Brian Flores defense. For the New England Patriots, you went with Christian Barmore. I do agree. Obviously, Barmore is one of the most talented players that they have on the roster, even still with a lot of new talent in there after free agency and the draft. The issue with him is he got put on the non-football injury list before the season began last year due to blood clots. He only played in 2 games because of that. He was activated in November, but then he got put back on the list in December because of reoccurring symptoms. And so scary stuff. Obviously, you're just hoping that he is fully healthy and he's okay. But I agree, certainly, like, having him as a bounce-back player, even with just his availability, will go a long way into how good this defense is going to be this upcoming season.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can imagine if he is healthy in time for the season, and now him next to Milton Williams, who led the league in pass rush grade. Barmore put up an 84.9 pass rush grade in 2023. This team was 30th. They were behind Minnesota in pass rush grade from their defensive tackles last year, the 3rd worst in football. And if you had these 2 players healthy, Milton Williams after the season he just added in Philly, and then Barmore, if he gives you the 2023 form, all of a sudden this defensive line looks crazy good, especially on the inside. So look, Barmore's that talented. There's a reason they drafted him that high. He started to become a star in 2023. Unfortunate what happened last year, but if he bounces back, you can see the vision that Mike Vrabel has for this defense. Barmore and Williams on the inside especially could be really, really dangerous. This is not going to be a fun interior pass rush to try to block if both of these guys are as healthy and as effective as we know they can be.
For the New Orleans Saints, You went with Isaac Yiadom, the cornerback there, who is now replacing Paulson Adebo, who is now with the New York Giants. So it'll be Kool-Aid McKinstry on one side, Yiadom on one side, and then probably Alontae Taylor in the slot because he's sort of been their outside-inside slot defender there. So you're looking for a bounce-back year for him. I've got another name that I'll bring to the table in a second, but your thoughts on Yiadom being the pick here?
Yeah, we're kind of playing around with the New Orleans voodoo, something going on down there, because most of Yiadom's career has been in the low to mid 50s in coverage grade, but the 1 year prior he was with the Saints in 2023, that was an 80.4, and he was one of the best zone coverage players in the league, and that should fit in with Brandon Staley's defense, his new defense down there as well. So I think I'm kind of playing, and I'm like, you know what, maybe there's just something about New Orleans, there's something about playing in the black and gold that worked for Isaac Yiadom, and you get him at, it won't be Dennis Allen this time, it'll be Brandon Staley as his DC, but you could get a bounce back. Maybe it's just where he belongs. He belongs in New Orleans, he belongs with the Saints, and you got a really young cornerback room, and he's really the one veteran out there leading that. I think you could see a bounce back if that's where he's most comfortable, and that's just what what defense he should be in. He should be playing for the Saints.
I'll say Taliese Fuanga, right? Moving back to right tackle after playing at left tackle this past season, sort of out of necessity because they didn't have a left tackle there, and it was sort of up in the air with Ryan Ramczyk, who hadn't officially retired there at that point. It's like, okay, well, we know he's going to play one of these spots, but which one? Let's put him at left tackle. So, if Ryan Ramczyk ends up coming back, we'll be able to play him just at right tackle where he's been at home. So now with them drafting Kelvin Banks Jr., they can move Taliese Fuanga, who was fine. I will say that. Like, he had a 65.7 overall PFF blocking grade last season, playing over 1,000 snaps, but it wasn't anything close to the elite overall grades that he had over the last 2 seasons prior to that when he was at Oregon State at right tackle. So now he's moving back to that right tackle spot since Kelvin Banks Jr. They drafted him in the first round at number 9 overall. He's going to play that left tackle spot. You're probably kicking Trevor Penning inside to one of those guard spots. You're hoping that he earns one of those because they did not pick up the 5th-year option on his contract. Certainly a contract to make or break year for him there. But I would say Fuanga, I certainly, they just have to have the best offensive line possible. I mean, you got to hope that Eric McCoy's going to be fully healthy. You got to hope, okay, next to him, you have Penning. You'll have Cesar Ruiz as well, and then you'll have 2 tackles that you feel good about. The Saints, for as much as I don't love their outlook on this upcoming season, I think they are destined for a top 10, if not a top 5 pick in the 2026 NFL draft. If you have a good offensive line, that can alleviate a lot of negatives and a lot of question marks that you have on the offense. So I would love for Fuanga to be a bounce-back player to the version of him that was confident and dominant that we saw at Oregon State.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm sure, look, Tyler Shuck is hoping for everything that you just mentioned as well. That's really neat. That's what really needs to happen here is this offensive line needs to develop. If Tyler Shuck is the guy behind that line to make things happen and he's the franchise quarterback, cool, I'm with you. I don't think they're going to win a ton of games, but that would be the big development for me with this Saints team is offensive and defensive lines. They've got to find those young foundational pieces, and they've got to get better in the trenches before they can start competing.
The New York Giants, you went with safety Javon Holland, who is a newcomer there. He's playing with the Miami Dolphins over the last couple of years throughout his rookie contract, I should say. Now he moves over to the Giants. So your thoughts on him and expectations with him now being in New York?
Yeah, I think another safety we're talking about here that needs to bounce back to his previous norms, right? Look, over the last 4 years, he's tied for 5th in the league among all safeties in coverage grade, but last year, career low coverage grade, 57. First year of his career with no interceptions. That Miami secondary was kind of a mess all the way around, and I think it's another case where he can get in the role where he's most comfortable. It's like I talked about with Geno Stone earlier. Get Holland back there as the single high center fielder like the Giants used to have with Xavier McKinney, and probably shouldn't have let him walk to Green Bay where he could lead the league in interceptions, but you get that type of player back here with Holland, with Tyler Nubin as the box safety who can play the run, a really good run defense grade, I believe around 78 last year in his rookie season. Nubin in the box, Holland as the free, play all that cover 3 that Shane Bowen wants to, get the defensive line going with Carter and Lawrence and Burns and all those guys. So I think you're talking about Holland as a bounce back candidate, much like I talked about with Geno Stone and even Hufanga in Denver. Get him in the right role. He's going to be comfortable. We've seen him play at an elite level before. Just let him do what he does back there as a free safety.
Yeah, I'll shout out Paulson and Debo as well, and it's not as much of a bounce back because I think that even with the low coverage grades last year, you see he was still able to get his hands on the football. He had 3 interceptions, he had 7 passes defended. The previous year he had more. He had 4 interceptions, he had 11 passes defended. So he just got his hands on the ball a little bit more the previous season. But I think that it's all there for him. I'm really excited about both of those additions for the New York Giants. But I would love to see those guys be bounce back to whatever the best version of a coverage player they are, because I think that could be fun with the Giants. The Jets, you went with running back Breece Hall. Again, I completely agree here for you. Sauce Gardner wasn't as good last year as he was the previous season, so you could say that he needs to bounce back a little bit more, but cornerback is just so... it's so naturally up and down. I even look at what Sauce Gardner was last year, and I was like, yeah, the defense just wasn't as good overall. So he wasn't going to be good or as good as a whole. I think the same thing with Quinnen Williams, right? I mean, these are players who didn't play great, especially with what they've been most of the time throughout their careers. But I think Breece Hall is the choice here because he was a major disappointment last season. And there's a lot of reasons. The offensive line didn't play as good as it could have. Just the offense in general, I think, was lacking that identity. It was very frustrating, clearly, the entire time in New York. But Breece Hall's got to play better. It's a new regime. This is not the regime that drafted him. And I think that if he does not have a bounce-back year, he might not be with the Jets after his rookie contract. What do you think about Breece Hall's situation?
No, I think and that's the funny part, is a guy who had over 1,300 total yards last year, you go, well, he had a bad year. Well, a lot of it, I think, was a focus thing. And you look at, I mentioned the whole time last year about how the Jets just lacked leadership, and this is what can happen. Breece Hall had the second most fumbles in the league, and he had the most drops of any running back in the league. It just seemed to be, even just right from week one, a focus issue with him. Now, we know he's talented. We know he's a home run hitter. We know he can be a workhorse back. He's done it before, and a dual threat back at that, as a runner and as a receiver. And look, if the Jets are going to have any sort of success as it comes to wins and losses this year, they're going to run the football a whole lot. They've got this offensive line. They've got Justin Fields. They've got Breece Hall, Braylon Allen, and they've only really got one good receiver in Garrett Wilson. So they're going to run the football a ton. If Breece Hall can be the guy that we know he can be, and we saw in previous seasons before, and even in flashes last year, we did see it. There's just moments where you can't have the drops and the fumbles because they turn games away from your favor, right? It's just those back-breaking plays you can't have. But Hall could be in line for a big season with Fields as his quarterback, as a read option threat. And this offensive line, this young offensive line emerging. They drafted Armand Membu, obviously, to play right tackle. Got Fashanu on the other side, and the interior is pretty good. Hall's a player who really, he could make himself a lot of money this year. And he could be a really crucial part to the Jets' success this year, whatever level of success that might be. I'm always pessimistic on it. But I think you have a scenario where you go, okay, this is your moment, right? This is your moment, new regime, good offensive line, read option quarterback, all that stuff, where you could have a huge season, but you can't have the focus issues. You can't have the fumbles and the drops and the things that drag down the grades and drag your team down along with it.
Glad that you realize that you're pessimistic. At least I think that's the
fully aware. I'll admit it absolutely every time. Come on now.
For the Philadelphia Eagles, this was, much like we talked about with the Minnesota Vikings, an incredibly difficult exercise to do with the Eagles. When Bryce Huff was on the roster, it was a little bit easier, right? And now he's no longer there. Now he's a member of the San Francisco 49ers. You ended up switching your answer because I believe that your initial answer when you were writing the article was Bryce Huff. Now you switched it to A.J. Dillon, who comes in as the backup behind Saquon Barkley. How'd you land on A.J. Dillon?
Yeah, well, I landed on him because, like you mentioned, the one guy that I could consider for a bounce back for the Eagles, they go and trade him to the 49ers 3 days ago. So, that helps me. Appreciate that, having to make a last-minute switch. Thanks, Howie, always doing something. But, no, I'll just go with A.J. Dillon here. He didn't play at all last year. I believe it was a neck injury that he missed the entire season with. And look, as the number 2 back with Aaron Jones in Green Bay, he was solid. Is Saquon Barkley still going to get a heavy amount of the volume? Absolutely, but they don't have a whole lot of proven options behind him, right? You have Will Shipley, who was operating on the special teams, and he played a little bit at the end of last year. A.J. Dillon, a guy who's used to playing that complementary role, and the only weird thing about it is with the tush-push staying in, he's not really going to get goal line work because goal line work is Jalen Hurts' thing too. So, look, they need a reliable number 2 back. I'll be honest with you, once Bryce Huff got traded, I was like, all right, I don't know where I'm going with this. The Eagles, they were so good last year, they don't really need anybody to bounce back per se. Nobody really played poorly. That's how darn good they were from week 5 on to the rest of the season through the Super Bowl. So, I'll go with A.J. Dillon. If he gives them a solid number 2 back and spells Saquon a little bit, then that's a success.
I think that the only other player that I really would have considered here for Philadelphia is along the same lines of Bryce Huff, and that's Josh Uche, right? I mean, like, Uche hasn't been great for a couple seasons now, but 2 seasons ago, what was this, the 2022 season, I believe? I had his numbers up here a second ago. Yeah, New England in 2022, he did have 12 sacks. He had a 87.8 pass rush grade. He had 41 hurries. He had 56 total pressures. I mean, like, he was a really good situational pass rusher 2 years ago, and so a bounce back to that form, I think, could be an answer there. But it's hard to pick anybody.
Yeah, I mean, they were the hardest one by far, because we look at other teams and we're like, oh, it's their starting quarterback, or it's their best player, or it's the new big free agent. And with the Eagles, it's like, oh, it's either a backup running back or their 5th defensive end. Yeah, that's how good their roster is. Cool. Yeah, okay. And then they go and trade the one guy that I had. That's cool, too. Yeah, appreciate that.
Of course. The Pittsburgh Steelers, you went with linebacker Patrick Queen, a little bit of a part 2 we talked about with Roquan Smith with the Baltimore Ravens. When that duo was together, you mentioned over the previous couple of seasons, they were both playing really, really well together. Now in separate spots, both struggled a little bit, or at least took a step back from what they had previously been. So you landed on Patrick Queen being the guy that you want to see play better here in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, similar story. It was that Roquan and Queen were so good together, and Patrick Queen takes the money and goes to Houston, and it's just not quite as good. His worst grade since 2021, and 2021 is the year before Roquan Smith got to Baltimore. So I think, there is something to that. Now, I'll say this year, maybe, just maybe, you get a similar player next to him. Maybe Peyton Wilson emerges as that middle linebacker next to Queen that he needs, right? Because Queen really used to playing a lot on the weak side, where he can run and chase and then play well in coverage. That's the role he played with Roquan. But I think that might be what it takes to happen, is he needs somebody like Peyton Wilson to emerge next to him to play better. Because if you look at the money they're paying him to get just a 56.8 PFF grade out of him, it's not good enough. And if he does that again this year, then you really start to question if they have to rework this linebacker room again. But I think that's the hope, is that if Peyton Wilson can be that guy next to Patrick Queen, just like Roquan Smith does, or was, I should say, in Baltimore, then you've got him to where he can get back to the level he was playing at with Roquan next to him. But the Steelers need to get better at corner. They got Darius Slay, but internally at linebacker, they just need to get better with the players that are there, and that's Peyton Wilson, and it's Patrick Queen especially.
I'll throw out Roman Wilson, too, who I understand that he was going through injury, but, like, damn, man, we got to get him to bounce back to what we saw with him that last year at Michigan, because straight up the Steelers need him. I mean, he has to be wide receiver 2 on that team behind DK Metcalf now, so need a bounce back, breakout, whatever you want to call it, performance from Roman Wilson, who I was a little disappointed we didn't see more from him last season. I think that he could be great when he is fully healthy, but he's going to have every opportunity to crack that starting lineup, and I think they really need him. Speaking of guys who availability is the biggest thing that we're talking about here for the San Francisco 49ers, I think that as a team, they really struggled last year. There were players that certainly just need to play better, but it starts with Christian McCaffrey, who wasn't available a lot of the season due to injury. He was going through a lot of stuff, but man, McCaffrey, look, I ended up having McCaffrey at RB8 going into the season in my running back rankings, and that feels criminally low for Christian McCaffrey, but it's basically the same stuff. When he's fully healthy, he's one of the best running backs in the NFL. But that has now happened less than half of the time that he has been in the league. And so, to me, it's a little bit about like the Jair Alexander conversation when we were talking about the Packers. I agree with you here with this pick. It's just simply bounce back to being healthy, to being the player that we know you could be when you're out there on the football field. So I picked I would also pick Christian McCaffrey for those reasons.
Yeah, I mean, after 2023, when they just barely lost the Super Bowl to the Chiefs, McCaffrey was RB1. He was best running back in the league, and last year, just all the injuries piled up on him. You look at this 2023 season, I mean, 90.3 rushing grade, an 86.5 receiving grade, breaking tackles, explosive plays, lining up at receiver and making things happen. I mean, he is one of the true do-it-all backs that we have. And the 49ers, look, their offense especially, they're talented enough to make the postseason. If McCaffrey comes back healthy, Brandon Ayuk comes back healthy, doing what he can do, Jawan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, George Kittle, this offense can still be one of the best offenses in the league, but they really need McCaffrey to be the engine of it healthy. I have my doubts about it if it's just going to be Isaac Guerrero and Jordan James. And I know Kyle Shanahan always makes no-name backs. He makes them great players because of the blocking in the system and all that. But McCaffrey gave you a different dimension. He's a game breaker in the run game and in the passing game. And if you get that guy back, at least for one more season, San Fran can still absolutely compete for the postseason. Their defense will probably then be the determinant of how far can they get to and what Robert Saleh can do with that unit. But McCaffrey is the engine, right? He's the engine of the whole thing. If you get him going behind and I should mention Trent Williams too. He's got to come back healthy as well, right? I mean, he missed the second half, most of the second half of last year. So there's a lot. I think there's a high variance of things that could happen for the 49ers this year. But we just mentioned some huge names coming back off injury. If they're all healthy and playing up to the capability, this is still a dangerous team. But I think it starts with McCaffrey as the engine of it.
For the Seahawks, you went with DeMarcus Lawrence, which I think is, again, the obvious pick that you should make here, because when you look at Lawrence, since 2017, these are his overall single-season PFF grades. 91.6, 88.0, 86.2, 88.7, 90.9, 73.9, 91.0, and then last year, a 56.8. So there's no question that even just looking at PFF scores, he would be a candidate where now in Seattle, they're looking for him to have a bounce back season. But I think those numbers kind of speak for themselves. But what more about DeMarcus Lawrence do you have here?
I think what you get, and for a team that for a couple of years now has been struggling to find run defense, you off the edge get one of the best run defenders in the league. 2023, a 92.2 run defense grade. That's actually, and he's always been known as a really good pass rusher, but I think the fact that he can help you in both factors, right, in run defense and in the pass rush. And if you feel like, okay, pass rush isn't quite working, they've got other guys who can rush the passer, Uchenna Nwosu, right? You've got Boye Mafe, obviously. So I think when you're looking at Lawrence and what he could do for this team on early downs, Byron Murphy get a little bit better on the inside. Leonard Williams, one of the best players in football. You got the linebackers and Tyrese Knight coming along pretty well as young players. But Lawrence and what he can give them as a veteran presence in run defense, I think that's actually where the most impact is going to be had. He can be really good. Another guy just has to come off the injury and be healthy.
Who's the other player that I was looking at for the Seahawks? There was one other player. Byron Murphy, kind of. But again, like rookie season, I wanted to bounce back to the version of him, an elite player that we saw at Texas. But probably more of a breakout is, I think, the better way to say it.
I think you could argue Cooper Kupp, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good call-out, too.
I think he was.
Cup, I think it's a good call up
for
him.
Okay. He was okay last year, but it didn't. It's just obviously. I don't think it's not going to get back to 2021 when he had like the greatest season ever. But
yeah,
you could certainly argue Cooper Kupp, and they're going to need him to be good around Smith and Jigba. They're going to need MVS to be good around Smith and Jigba. They're going to need other guys who can allow Smith and Jigba to get open. And Cooper Kupp's probably the first one you think about.
Mr. Folgers in the chat, as now we are at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, said for the Bucks, Jamel Dean is low-hanging fruit there, but Tweez is the 200 IQ answer. Let's see what the boys choose. Tweez is the nickname for the player that you chose in Antoine Winfield Jr. So you did end up picking Antoine Winfield Jr. as the player that you want to have a bounce-back season. Let's talk about Tweez.
Absolutely. Look, to me, the back end of their defense, and they struggled middle of the field coverage. He missed a handful of games with injury. He was never quite right even down the stretch. Winfield, he's the glue that holds this whole defense together. I mean, he's one of the best safeties in football. The 3 years prior, I believe he was the highest graded safety in football over those 3 years. He's just got to be better in coverage. He's still going to come down in the box and hit. But this Tampa Bay unit as a whole, whether it's, Levante David's still playing 1 year at a time, whatever else is going on at linebacker. Jordan Whitehead struggled last year. You've mentioned they've got some other options they think could play safety, whether it's Christian Izien or Tyke Smith. But Winfield's the glue that holds the middle of that defense together. Get him healthy. Get him playing all 17 games. Get him a little bit more fluid in coverage, because you could just tell it wasn't quite right last year in coverage. Only a 50.8 coverage grade. That's not what we're used to out of Winfield. He's a superstar. I think a bounce back year is most likely coming. He's got way too good of a track record not to get back to that level.
I agree with you completely. I also wouldn't pick Jamel Dean here because I've never really thought that Jamel Dean was like a shutdown corner. And you asked him to be a CB1 last year, and it didn't go as well, even when he wasn't hurt. And so I wouldn't have picked Jamel Dean because he has largely been very up and down, and that's kind of what he has been throughout his career. So I would also go with Antoine Winfield Jr. here. I would also agree with you here with the next selection with the Tennessee Titans. You went with cornerback L'Jarius Sneed in his first year in Tennessee. He struggled. He was not the same player, the same impactful player that we saw during his time in Kansas City. And I think you get that a lot with corners, right? A lot of times they are very comfortable in certain defensive systems with certain defensive coordinators and what is asked of them and just the positions that they are put in. And it was one of those instances where a change of scenery did not work out well. And I just don't think that happens a lot with corners. I think that sometimes we look at free agency and we go like, oh, let's get this corner to like come over to this team. And like obviously sometimes it works. When we break down free agency signings, we don't just talk about like guys who are good and guys who aren't. We talk about scheme fits, and we did a lot of that in February and March of this past year before free agency. But even with that being the case, even if you have a guy who's like a good scheme fit, sometimes you're just not as confident in what they are being asked to do and how the coach is seeing it versus how they are seeing it. And so L'Jarius Sneed, in my opinion, was one of those situations where you asked a corner to just go play in a different system, and he didn't play well. So I agree with you. I think that Sneed has to be number one on the list of guys that they need to bounce back because they spent a lot to go get him.
Didn't play well, and also only played 5 games last year before he got hurt. So I think what you're talking about with him is it's another one kind of like Winfield, like we just mentioned. The track record is too good to be that bad. To have a 36 coverage grade, you knew something was off, whether it's scheme or injuries or a combination of both, and obviously missed most of the season. This is one where you just kind of trust what you've seen for all of those years in Kansas City, especially in man coverage, and just go, okay, he's going to be better than this, right? And for this team, he has to be. He was such a big pickup. He traded a third-round pick for him and paid him all that money to get him. This was the big name that you brought in last offseason. He's got to be better for them. This Titans defense, all the attention's obviously going to be on Cam Ward, but the back seven of this defense as well really needs to get better for them to get going. We've talked about kind of the mystery they have at linebacker and all the different names they're throwing at linebacker, but Sneed coming back at corner and playing the way that we know he can play and he did in Kansas City, that's a big help for a team that's trying to build the back end of this defense as well.
The final pick here that we have during this exercise is the Washington Commanders, and there's new wide receiver Deebo Samuel. So Samuel is in his first year in Washington, so we have not seen him in this system yet, but career low overall offensive grade this past season with a 70.9. He just really hasn't looked the same since that dominant 2021 season where they used him as a receiver, they used him as a running back, they used him basically in every way that you would want a team to use Deebo Samuel, and he was excellent. He was an elite player, he was a takeover player, but he just hasn't been that same guy, whether he's been on the field or off the field, as we have seen him deal with injury, and he has gone through that as well. So he is now with the Washington Commanders. It's our first year getting to see him in that system, but I do agree with you. This is the bounce back player that you want. This is the player who I think that has the higher ceiling of maybe the price that you paid to go get him, or at least the investment of where he's going to be in the offense, since it didn't take too much. But your thoughts on Deebo Samuel here now in Washington?
Yeah, I think there was a time last year where he looked like that guy. If you look at the first 8 weeks of last season, Trevor, he had the 7th best receiving grade in football. And he was racking up almost 17 yards a catch. He's racking up 8.3 yards after catch per reception, because that's what he does. I believe those numbers were all in the top 8 wide receivers in weeks 1 through 8. And then his production kind of dropped off a cliff when every other thing on the 49ers did as well, the defense and the offensive line and Brock Purdy. So he kind of just went down with the ship. But when they were healthy and they were right the first 8 weeks of the season, Deebo was still really good. And he's going to a team that runs the 6th highest rate of screens in football. They're trying to find yards after catch to complement the deep threat with Terry McLaurin, right? So I think he's going to the right offense with Cliff Kingsbury. And even then, I do wonder, too, get him out of San Francisco, maybe they just stop putting him in the backfield and having him do the running back work as well. Just go, you know what? Do what you're used to out here at receiver. We will find touches for you, get the football in your hands, and we just need you to move the chains. I think there's still plenty in the tank for Deebo Samuel, and he's going to a really good spot in this offense with McLaurin as a deep threat, with Jaden Daniels obviously throwing him the football with as much as they want to run the ball, and Cliff Kingsbury probably get into some trick plays and some things as well with Deebo. I think he went to a good spot. I think he's in for a really good year.
I think that how much or how little they use Deebo Samuel out of the backfield actually depends on Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt and how well he develops, throughout training camp and in the preseason, how much they can lean on him. Because if they don't think that they can get that explosiveness through him or Brian Robinson or Austin Eckler, they might put him in the backfield a little bit more. But I do think that he is going to a great spot there. Appreciate everybody watching the show. If you guys have not liked and subscribed to the channel or the podcast, please do so. We would really appreciate it. We're not just doing podcast episodes like this one once a week, but we're also doing a lot of fun stuff as well. Dalton, multiple times a week, is doing these film breakdowns, whether it's the rookies or guys who are in new spots or players who are going to bounce back or break out or whatever it is. We're getting into the film reviews there for him. So if you haven't seen those, check them out. They've been fantastic. We're going to be doing those throughout the summer. We've also got the PFF Rewrite series that we are doing, taking a look at the butterfly effect of looking past NFL drafts and saying like, ooh, well, if this happened, then what? I can tell you the one that we're working on right now is what if Andrew Luck actually did declare for the 2011 NFL draft, and how much fun that could be. That was the Cam Newton class, and so we talk about the debate there at the very top, and then what could happen after the draft and that ripple effect. So a lot of stuff like that. If you want to make sure that you see it and you don't miss it, like and subscribe to the channel, put the notifications on, all that great stuff. That's it for us in the live format of the podcast this week, but make sure you tune in. And next Monday is we will have another league-wide topic where we will touch on every single team in the NFL and break it down, getting you ready for the 2025 NFL season. For Dalton Wasserman, I'm Trevor Sikkema saying thank you so much for watching. See you guys next week.